The engine in my car is sick. It seems to have a lifter tick. If I want to once again be quick, some wrenches and elbow grease will do the trick. That was bad, wasn't it? So if you saw the end of the last episode, you saw right as I got this MSD intake put on the car while it was sitting on the dyno and ready to make my first pull with it, all of a sudden the engine developed this really loud lifter tick, or something that sounds like a lifter tick. And since I've had the car now for over 10 years and I really don't want to blow this motor up, I decided it wasn't worth it to send it and just see what happens. I limped it back home and it's been sitting here ever since. But the day has come for me to start tearing this thing apart, diagnose it, and figure out exactly what went wrong. First thing I got to do is get it up on jack stands. One, to give me an easier position to work, and two, in anticipation of having to pull the heads off, drain the coolant out, all that stuff. So I'm going to get started with that. People have all kinds of different opinions as to where you should jack these things up. My personal choices are, if you just have a normal jack, is to use the radiator core support right here. However, I would use some kind of a load spreader just to spread the load across this thing as you lift, because while it is solid wall tubing and it should be pretty strong, it is small and it's not the biggest diameter, so I would just spread the load across it. Now, if you have a large, long travel jack like I have, you can get all the way to the back of the car here, and you can get all the way to the back of the K-member, or you could call it the front subframe, and you can jack from that point. That is the thickest, strongest piece of it. So I'll slide all the way back here behind my skid plate, get right behind here, and that's where I will jack. So that's what I'm going to do. So back in my younger and less well-funded days, taking this apart, I would have been doing everything with just wrenches and ratchets and sockets. These days I'm a little older, I've got a little more money, and I'm going to be helped out a lot today by my good friend, Mr. Cordless Drill. First thing I got to do is take off the strut tower brace, and then I'm going to take off the coil pack so I can get to the valve covers, and we'll look at the valve train on top and see if anything has gone wrong up there. With this new intake on the engine, I'm noticing there's a couple other things I'm going to have to take off before I can get to removing the valve covers. So this emissions line for the charcoal canister in the back has got to come off. And then the line that I broke at the dyno for the evap purge solenoid, that's got to come off too. So then I can take this whole hard plastic deal off and get it out of the way first. And I'm having to be very, very careful with all of my connectors, my little clips that hold things on, because they're all very brittle now after so many years of use, and they're breaking apart when I try to unlock them and clip them open. Just need to cut these little zip ties I use to hold down the line for the new steam vent system, just using a pair of side cutters. A lot of people call these dikes. I don't like to call them dikes. I don't think it's very precise. Diagonal cutter, I think, if you must, but I always just call them side cutters. Now, if you watched the video 5 years ago where I helped my buddy Joe do the cam swap, taking off the coils on a stock car is really easy, because you just have that bracket that holds all the coils bolted to the valve cover. You take those 5 studded bolts out, and then you undo the main loom connector for the coil packs, and you can take one side off at a time really easy. Because I've got these Holley valve covers on here, I've got to unbolt the coils one at a time, but I can leave them all connected to the main loom, still take that out, and keep them kind of together as I do it. Oh, and I just realized this is going to be a great opportunity for me to use for the first time my magnetic screw trays. I got these, I think it was a Sears store that was going out of business or something. I got 2 of these for $5, and they're the big ones too. Stick them on the car anywhere, and they stick to the car and hold all your nuts and bolts so you don't lose them. Oh, when you're pulling spark plug wires off, always pull the boots, don't pull the wires, because you can just rip the wire right off of the metal connector that goes on the spark plug. There you go, that's one side out. While I'm in here, I'm actually curious, because remember when I was on the dyno, Connor, who worked at Rudd Performance, suggested that my plugs are probably fouled out because the intake ports were so dirty. I figure this is as good a time as any to find out if he was right about that. So I'm going to take a plug out here and we'll take a look. Oh, goodness. Yeah, that's kind of black. And I imagine that gap is not as small as it used to be. Here, I'll get her elbow close so you can see that. That's what she looks like now. Pretty black in there. Looks like it's been running a little rich. This white part shouldn't be as black as this, so I don't know if you'd call that fouled out, but it's definitely dirty. So I guess it is going to be time for some new spark plugs. Oh, and here's one other tip when it comes to spark plugs. Never take spark plugs out of a hot LS engine. These heads are made of aluminum. Aluminum gets very soft when it's hot, and you can rip the threads right out of the head if you try to take a spark plug out of a cylinder when it's hot like that. Other thing I'm doing as I'm pulling these spark plugs out is I'm looking at them and making sure that they all look pretty much the same. If one of them's wet, if one of them's white, a different color or looks different in some way, that means that cylinder is running different to the other cylinders, and that in itself could indicate some kind of a problem. So keep mind of that, and also keep track of which cylinders they're coming out of too. In case you do see some sort of difference, then you know which cylinder you're looking at. So I'm just laying them out in the order I'm taking them out. So this is number 1, this is number 3. If you ever get one of those kits at a parts store to take fuel lines off and these quick disconnect fittings, the blue one is the one you want to take the fuel line off the fuel rail. But before I do that, I have to bleed it out again. Fortunately, with the MSD, it's actually a little higher up, a little easier to get to. Just need some paper towel. By the way, now that's done, before you do this, make sure you disconnect the battery, or in my case, I removed it, because this is going to piss gas for a while, especially when you get to the point of starting to take the intake off. If you have to take it off, it's going to leak gas all over the place. I'm going to take a paper towel and wrap it around the edge of this fuel rail just to kind of absorb some of it, because I'm going to be taking the valve cover off and don't want to get gas in the oil. Just do that and then twist tie it up. There you go. Not perfect, but better than nothing. So here we go. All right, nice and clean on that side. But then the noise wasn't coming from this side, or at least we don't think it was coming from this side. I'm just going to check all the rockers quick. Oh, that one's got load on it. Everything seems fine. Nothing loose, nothing looks broken. Springs all look good. Okay, on to the other side. Again, everything up here looks fine. No needles floating around. I didn't drop any needles out of a trunnion. That all looks fine. Nice and clean. No sludge. In a way, that's good, because that means nothing's broken up here, but that means that tick's got to be coming from down below, because nothing's broken up here. So I guess the next step is take the intake off, and I got to start taking the heads off. So now it's time to finally take off the thing that I did all this for in the first place, the MSD intake. It's kind of sucked, because all that time I put in trying to figure out how to make this thing fit with the steam vent system and everything. But I suppose if I hadn't gone to all the trouble to put this thing on, and I hadn't heard that tick, I could have had a much bigger problem in my hands. So I guess it's trading luck for luck. Okay. Whew, this thing's heavy. Okay, so since I'm going to have to take the heads off now, I'm going to have to drain out the coolant system and get everything out of there. What I'm going to do is take the cap off, and then I got a bottle or a pan to put underneath to catch all the coolant. So I'm going to leave it like this, And then before I start taking anything else off, I'm going to jack the back up as high as I can, tip the whole engine forward, just to try to get as much coolant out of the engine and the water pump as possible, so when I'm taking things apart, I'm not making a huge mess everywhere. Start with this and open her up. That's a little low. Could this be uncovering more of the mystery? I guess we'll find out. Another thing people have a lot of opinions about is where you should jack the back of the car up. What I always say is, if you have the factory diff cover back here with the point coming back of it where the mount is, you lift right on that mount. If you can avoid it, don't lift on the diff itself, because you don't want to stress that case. You've got gears in there and bearings, and you wouldn't want to stress anything and potentially change the shape of any round holes. So always best to lift on the mount of the diff, not the diff itself. That is one thing that I love about this jack. Look how high I'm able to get the back of the car with this jack. And that's not with anything stacked on it even. That's just the jack itself. This was a Harbor Freight special. They called it a low approach, high lift jack when I bought it, 2.5 ton or something like that. This has been one of the best buys I have ever had. You've got really tall jack stands, you can easily get under the car to change the transmission or do anything you want. So, recommended buy if you need a jack. Okay, so this is where I'm at right now. Intake off, valve covers off, coolant is draining, top hose disconnected. I got the entire wiring harness off the front of the engine so the heads are exposed. Next thing will be to remove that bolt that's holding the dipstick tube and pull the dipstick tube out of the pan. Then I gotta start taking the header bolts out. And once the header bolts are out, I have a couple of grounds on the back of the cylinder heads that need to come off. If you can see them back there. And then I can start taking the heads off. Right now I'm taking out the bolts for the passenger side header, hoping none of them are gonna be stuck in there. And so far I've been pretty lucky. They break loose and they come right out with fingers, which is good, which means the threads are still in really good shape. These were a brand new, nice, shiny set of bolts that when I put these in, again, I think 7 years ago is when I bolted these things back on and did the engine rebuild. They were nice and shiny, a nice set from Fastenal. But after even 7 years and all those heat cycles, even stainless doesn't hold up. And all the ceramic coating over the years has gotten fluids dropped on it and stuff, and not nearly as shiny as it was when I put it all together 7 years ago. I suppose it's just one of those things when it comes to cars. Nothing stays nice forever. On most good sets of headers, one of the end bolt holes has got the bottom cut out of it, so you can put the bolt in and you can slide the header on top of it, and it'll act as a hook and hold it in place, so you don't have to sit there and hold the header while you're trying to get the other 5 holes lined up. This particular set though doesn't have that. These are Stainless Works first version 1 3/4 inch headers. I say first version because they had to come up with a revision for the driver's side, because the original design, which is what this is, would hit the steering rod when you would turn around a corner to the right with factory engine mounts, and then you wouldn't be able to steer the car. So to compensate for it on this car, what I did is I got the Hinson Supercar poly mounts, which raised the engine up just that little bit and wouldn't allow the engine to rock over anymore. Solve that problem. So this one's coming out a little tight just because the exhaust is still hooked up and everything is trying to hold the whole header's resting on the these 2 bolts right now. So this part will be a little tricky, but I'll get it out. A little tip when you're taking these exhaust header bolts off is get the 2 end ones started so they're moving freely. Then you can take all the inside ones out. That's just going to make it easier for you to get the end ones out when the time comes to take them off, since all the pressure of the header will be resting on them. They're already broken loose. It just makes things a little easier. Okay, the gasket. Oh, it was starting to leak just a little bit on cylinder 5. It didn't get out to the edge though, but it was getting there. So good thing we're going to be changing these. That's going to be fun to figure out. I figured that would be a problem. The driver's side header on a GTO sucks because it goes through the steering rod. So you can't just, even if it's unbolted from the exhaust, you can't just pull it out. I think I'm going to end up going underneath the car and unloosening the clamps that hold the headers onto the exhaust system just so I can move them around a bit. But even with that, I won't be able to get this header out because it goes around the steering rod unless I take the steering rod off of the rack. I hope I don't have to do that, but that might have to happen. I'm going to have no clearance issues on this side. This is moved back plenty. I'll be able to get that head off, which is good because this is where the noise is coming from. But I'm not just interested in fixing the noise on one side. If one lifter's failing, another is going to ultimately fail too, so I might as well change them all. It's time to get my buddy out and have him help me take some more bolts out here. These 5 bolts on the top of the head, these little guys, they don't have a whole lot of torque on them, and really all they're there for is just to seal up the coolant passages on the top of the block. They don't really hold the head down to the block. That's the job of the 10 big bolts farther down. Okay, I took those off just to feel like I was making some progress. The thing I have to do now before I can take the heads off is I have to undo all the bolts for the rockers. And when you do this, you really want to make sure that the rockers are all the way up and they're not trying to open a valve, because you don't want all that spring pressure on the threads for the rocker stud and the pedestal when you are trying to back them out. You want them, there's always going to be some pressure on them because there's a little bit of preload, but you want to have the minimum amount of pressure on there possible so you don't mess up any threads. So what you can do is you can just look down the line of a row of rockers and you can see which ones are up and which ones are coming down a little bit. And what I do is I'll loosen the ones that are all the way up and get them up. Then I'll spin the motor and look for the other ones to be up. And once they're up, then I'll loosen those two until all 16 are done, and then I can take them out. So for reference, it is a 6mm Allen to take these rocker studs out. But the other thing is, I don't have one for some reason. Mine is missing, so I get to make a trip to the parts store and go get one. Okay, a trip to the parts store and a pair of glasses later, and I have acquired the 6mm Allen that I need to get these out. I just looked down this line of the motor, and the only valve that's even open right now is this one, so I should be able to undo the other 7 of these. The only thing I'm not sure of if the impact gun that I've got is going to be strong enough to knock these things loose, because they're super, super tight from sitting there for so long. But once they break loose, they're loose. So we'll see what happens. Yep, this ain't gonna do it. I gotta do them by hand. All right, trusty breaker bar. Let's see what we get. Ugh. See what I mean? They start hard, but then they back off real nice. And truth be told, I would probably be better off using a 1/2-inch breaker bar right now to make the leverage a lot better, but I can't find my reducer. So 3-inch breaker bar it is. Okay, still 2 valves open. So now I got to get down there with the breaker bar, turn the motor, and get those valves up. Fortunately, with no spark plugs and almost all the valves undone, spinning this motor over is going to be really easy. There, let's see if that was enough. Yeah, she's up now. Now what you need is a good place to put your whole valve train. So what's great is there's this rail that all of the rockers sit on, and you can grab that rail, pick everything up, set it down in a nice place like this, and just make sure you mark on the front of it, front, so you know which end is the front of the motor, so when you put them back in, you're putting them back in the way they came out. When it's a part like this, this is a good opportunity to inspect your rockers. So I'm just rotating them through their full motion here just to make sure they're not making any funny noises. I've got the trunnion upgrade with the comp needle bearings, so mine are really nice. They move good. So that all seems fine. I'm just gonna look at the undersides where the rockers are connecting with the push rods. Just make sure they're not scratched or scored in any way. I mean, they're gonna be worn down a little bit and it's gonna be shiny. That's expected. It also gives you an idea of your valve train geometry, because some of these, their wear mark is right in the middle, but like this one right here, it's a little off to the side. Actually, I take that back. This is the side where the valves are being engaged by the rocker. So right on this one, this push rod is not engaging that rocker right on center. It's a little off center. So I'm gonna have to figure out what's causing that. So let's see, that came from this side. So that's this one right here. It's hitting a little off. I was looking at the wear on the valve stem. The wear looks okay. It just looks like this was off center a little bit. I'm gonna check the other side just out of curiosity. They all look pretty good as well. Here's another one where it's hitting a little left of center. Interesting. So, wonder what's causing that. I'll have to do some research. Okay, now that I've got the rockers and the pedestals and the bar out, it's time to take the push rods out. Now, there's no right or wrong order to do this, and you just take them out. The important thing, again, is to make sure everything goes back where it was. So I'm going to take them out and I'm going to set them in that box right next to their corresponding rocker, so I know where they go. But before I do that, I'm going to take them all out and I'm going to just lay them all beside each other and make sure they all lay flat and straight, and make sure that somehow I didn't end up with a bent push rod. So I've got all the push rods in order right here, and this is the frontmost one. That's why I just have it a little farther forward. So I'm just rolling them to make sure they all stay in line, and I shouldn't see any weird vibrations, and as long, or any weird abnormalities, any bends or anything. If I can't see paper towel through them, then I know that they're all staying straight, unless they turn to the side like that, because I'm not pushing in the middle. So if I'm doing that and they stay straight and I can't see the paper towel, then they are still good and straight. So no bent push rods. I didn't expect that was the case, but it never hurts to check, even though these are some pretty heavy-duty Manton push rods, and you'd have to do something really messed up to bend one. Okay, now it is time to finally start unbolting these cylinder heads. Now, there is no order of routine in doing this. My advice would be, it is probably best to follow reverse of the order to be that you tighten the bolts down in initially. So I would work my way from the outside ones, loosen the outside four, loosen the next inside four, loosen the centers last. Just because it's the reverse of what you did when you installed them. This is what always gets you when you're loosening stuff too. This wiring harness, all kinds of little sharp plastic doodads on here that are scratching the hell out of my thumb right now as I'm doing this. Always a joy. When these come out, if you have original head bolts from the factory, when they come out, they're gonna feel kind of weird because they're torque to yield. So when you put them in, they stretched. And when they stretched, those threads came apart from each other just a little bit and their gap widened. So then when you pull them out, they're gonna come out a little snug and feel a little snug for a while. That's to be expected. It's just what comes with factory torque to yield bolts. Okay, I got the suspect side of the engine apart, and unfortunately as I was taking it apart my mic wasn't working, so I gotta film this again. But so here we've got, these are the lifters for cylinder number 8. So if you look at this roller on this is nice and smooth. Same thing here. This is nice and smooth and clean. Here we got cylinder 6. There is a fine line cut in this roller here, but you can't even feel it, but it is in the metal, and it's obvious if I get the angle right here. Yeah, you can see that. But that wouldn't be enough to cause a problem. This right here is also fine. We move on to cylinder number 4, which I wrapped this one up really good. So we got a good roller here, and we've got a good roller tip there. Those seem fine. Then we get on to cylinder number 2. We've got a good roller, and then we got Right there. That was the problem. That roller is getting destroyed. I don't know what's causing it. I don't know if something failed in the lifter, but there are visible gashes all throughout the roller. I can feel them really defined. And the worst part, if I get in here, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but I've got the cam lobe up right now. No, you can't see it. If I can turn the flash on, maybe it'll focus in there. Yep, you can see it. That lobe is jacked. So this camshaft is shot. I'm going to have to replace it. But the last time I changed the oil, I thought I saw shiny on the drain plug. And I'm pretty sure I was right now. So it picked up metal, the magnet did, which is good. It's supposed to do that. But now I have to ask myself, has that metal gotten in the connecting rod bearings? Has that metal gotten in the crank bearings? Are they going to be as scratched up and corrupted? Do I take a chance of putting this thing back together with a new cam and fresh oil and hoping it's all going to be okay? Or do I play it safe, pull the whole engine out, have the whole thing taken apart, have the block washed, inspected, make sure everything's clean, and rebuild the whole thing? That's kind of where I'm at. So I think that's going to do it for now. I know I'm going to have to replace the camshaft for sure. So I guess it's a question of, do I take the risk? Maybe you've had this experience before and maybe you could have an opinion on it. I'm going to obviously consult some experts and other people and take in a bunch of different opinions and make as informed a decision as I can as to how I should proceed, whether I can just throw a new cam and lifters in it, slap it back together and change the oil and hope it'll be fine, or if I should really take the whole thing apart and have it gone through and take my time and just make sure everything is good. So that's where I'm at right now. I think I'll wrap it up here because you already saw me take one head off and you already saw everything that's involved in doing it. The lesson's been taught and now I know what's wrong with my engine, so now I just have to decide how I'm going to fix it. So thank you so much for watching this episode of Josh's Car Corner, and I'll see you sometime soon. Like what you just saw? Let me know with a thumbs up or by subscribing and clicking that little bell so you know when new episodes come out. And be sure to join the new Facebook group I set up too for Josh's Car Corner.